My parents gave my college fund to my stepsister's wedding, so I exposed their golden child at Thanksgiving. Everything changed when I discovered my college fund had vanished to pay for my stepsister's dream wedding. Taylor, 19, stared at the bank statement in disbelief. The numbers didn't make sense. Just 3 months ago, there had been $82,457.38 in the college fund account. Money accumulated since birth from birthday gifts, high school graduation presents, and contributions from grandparents who had always emphasized the importance of education. Now, the balance showed a mere $47.32. The remaining amount wasn't the shocking part. It was the fact that over $82,000 had disappeared without a single word to Taylor. The discovery happened on a random Tuesday evening. Taylor had been checking the account to plan tuition payments for the upcoming semester at State University, where Taylor was studying computer science. The initial reaction was to assume there had been some kind of banking error or fraud. But as Taylor reviewed the transaction history, a pattern emerged. Multiple large withdrawals over the past 2 months, all processed with proper authorization. The authorization that only Taylor's parents, David and Michelle, would have had access to. Taylor's family situation was complicated. David had remarried Michelle when Taylor was just 7 years old, 2 years after Taylor's biological mother had passed away from cancer. Michelle came with a daughter, Brianna, who was the same age as Taylor. From the beginning, there had been an undeniable preference for Brianna. While Taylor was academically gifted and independent, Brianna was charming, socially adept, and effortlessly became the center of attention in any room. Over the years, the favoritism had grown more pronounced, but Taylor had always tried to maintain a relationship with both parents and stepsister, telling themselves that family dynamics were rarely perfect. The most recent source of tension had been Brianna's engagement to Tyler, the son of a wealthy local business owner. The wedding planning had consumed the entire household for months. Michelle and David seemed more excited about Brianna's nuptials than they had been about anything in Taylor's life, including Taylor's acceptance to State University with a partial scholarship. Taylor's mind raced as they connected the dots. The timing of the withdrawals aligned perfectly with when the wedding expenses would have been paid. Could it be possible? Would their parents really take Taylor's college fund to pay for Brianna's wedding without even mentioning it? The thought seemed so outrageous that Taylor almost dismissed it entirely. But the evidence was there in black and white on the screen. The next morning, Taylor decided to approach the subject cautiously at breakfast. Brianna was already at her wedding planning appointment, so it was just Taylor, David, and Michelle at the kitchen table. Taylor casually mentioned checking the college fund account and asked if there had been any changes or transfers they should know about. The exchange that followed was evasive at best. David mumbled something about rearranging finances, while Michelle quickly changed the subject to ask if Taylor had picked up Brianna's dress from the seamstress. That conversation confirmed Taylor's worst fears. The money was gone, taken without permission, and apparently without any intention of repayment. As Taylor sat in their room later that day, scrolling through photos of the extravagant wedding venue, the designer dress, the 5-tier cake, and the open bar planned for 200 guests, a cold realization set in. Taylor's future had been sold to fund Brianna's perfect day.
The betrayal was overwhelming, but what hurt most wasn't just the money, it was the message it sent. Taylor's education, the one thing Taylor had worked tirelessly for, was less important than a lavish party. As Taylor lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, a plan began to form. Not a plan to get the money back, Taylor knew that was unlikely, but a plan to expose the truth, to make everyone see what had been done. The perfect opportunity was just weeks away. Thanksgiving dinner, with the entire extended family gathered at their home, including Michelle's wealthy parents who adored their golden child, Brianna. The days following the discovery of the missing college fund were a blur of quiet investigation and simmering resentment. Taylor began paying closer attention to conversations around the house, piecing together the full scope of the wedding expenses and the family's financial decisions. What Taylor learned only deepened the sense of betrayal. It turned out that the $82,000 from Taylor's college fund was just part of what had been spent on Brianna's wedding. The total cost was approaching $150,000, an astronomical amount for a family that wasn't particularly wealthy. David and Michelle had taken out a second mortgage on their home to cover the difference. Taylor overheard them arguing about it late one night, Michelle insisting that Brianna deserved the perfect wedding, David worrying about how they would manage the payments. The most painful discovery was learning that the withdrawals had started just days after Taylor had received the final scholarship information from State University. Taylor had been awarded an additional $10,000 academic scholarship for the year, reducing the amount needed from the college fund. When Taylor had shared this good news with the family, David and Michelle had seemed unimpressed, merely nodding before turning their attention back to Brianna, who was complaining that her wedding invitations weren't luxurious enough. Now Taylor understood why. They had already decided to take the full amount regardless of Taylor's aides. Taylor tried to maintain normalcy, going to classes and working part-time at the campus library, but the anger and hurt were consuming. At home, Taylor became increasingly withdrawn, which David and Michelle either didn't notice or chose to ignore. They were too focused on wedding preparations, treating Brianna like royalty while Taylor faded into the background. The contrast was never more apparent than when Taylor came home one evening to find Michelle hand-embellishing Brianna's veil with tiny pearls, a task that required hours of meticulous work. When Taylor had graduated high school with honors, Michelle had purchased a generic graduation card from the supermarket. The breaking point came 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Taylor was in the living room studying when Brianna came in, followed by Michelle. They were discussing the honeymoon, a 2-week trip to Bora Bora that Taylor hadn't even known about. As Brianna excitedly described the overwater bungalow she and Tyler would be staying in, she casually mentioned how grateful she was that Taylor had offered to help pay for it. The words hung in the air. Taylor looked up from the textbook, confused. Brianna noticed Taylor's expression and quickly said, "Oh, didn't Mom and Dad tell you? They used your college fund to pay for our honeymoon as a wedding gift. I told them you wouldn't mind since you're so smart and will probably get scholarships for everything anyway." Michelle shot Brianna a warning look, but it was too late.
The casual cruelty of the statement, the complete lack of awareness or concern for Taylor's future was staggering. Taylor didn't respond, just packed up the books and went to their room, where the decision to confront their parents was finally cemented. The next day, Taylor waited until after work when they knew David would be home alone. Michelle had taken Brianna for another wedding fitting, and Tyler was busy with his own family obligations. Taylor walked into the living room where David was watching television and stood directly in front of the screen. David looked annoyed at first, but his expression changed when he saw the look on Taylor's face. Taylor didn't yell or cry. Instead, Taylor calmly explained that they knew about the college fund, about the money taken without permission, about the second mortgage, about the honeymoon. As Taylor spoke, David's face went from annoyance to discomfort to outright panic. When Taylor finished speaking, there was a long silence. David finally sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He admitted everything: the withdrawals, the decision to use the money for the wedding, the plan to deal with Taylor's college situation later. He tried to justify it, explaining that Brianna's wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event, that Taylor would understand someday, that they would eventually pay Taylor back. His excuses were hollow, and they both knew it. What David didn't know was that Taylor had pressed record on their phone before starting the conversation. The entire confession, every excuse and rationalization was captured in clear audio. As David spoke, Taylor's hand remained steady, gripping the phone in a pocket, recording every word. With the confession recorded, Taylor felt a mixture of triumph and unease. The immediate satisfaction of having proof was tempered by the reality of what would come next. Taylor knew that exposing the truth would cause irreparable damage to the family, but the betrayal had already done that. The recording was merely a tool to make the invisible visible to everyone else. Taylor spent the next few days carefully planning the Thanksgiving exposure. The family gathering was scheduled for Thursday at their home, with approximately 25 relatives expected to attend. This included Michelle's parents, who were quite wealthy and had always favored Brianna, David's elderly mother, who lived on a fixed income, various aunts, uncles, and cousins, and of course, the happy couple, Brianna and Tyler. The plan was simple but required precise timing. Taylor would wait until after dinner when everyone was relaxed and content, and then play the recording for the entire assembled family. Taylor considered various methods of playback, connecting the phone to the television speakers, using a portable Bluetooth speaker, or simply holding up the phone and letting the audio fill the room. Each option had its pros and cons in terms of quality and drama. Taylor also prepared a backup plan. What if David or Michelle tried to stop the recording before it finished? What if they tried to confiscate the phone? Taylor made multiple copies of the audio file, storing them in cloud services, emailing them to a trusted friend, and saving them on a flash drive that Taylor kept in a pocket at all times. Taylor even created a simple presentation with key financial documents, the bank statements showing the withdrawals, the wedding invoices, the mortgage papers that could be displayed if needed. The emotional preparation was more challenging. Taylor rehearsed what to say before and after playing the recording, trying to find the right balance between factual recording and emotional impact. Taylor wanted to avoid coming across as purely vengeful, instead framing the exposure as a necessary consequence of the parents' actions. In the days leading up to Thanksgiving, the atmosphere at home grew increasingly tense. David and Michelle seemed to sense that something was wrong, but they couldn't identify the source. They made a few half-hearted attempts to engage Taylor in conversation, asking about classes or work, but their distraction was evident. Their focus remained entirely on Brianna and the upcoming wedding, now just 3 weeks away. Brianna, meanwhile, was in her element as the center of attention. She talked incessantly about the wedding, the dress, the registry, and the honeymoon. She occasionally made pointed comments about how lucky Taylor was to not have the stress of wedding planning, completely oblivious to the true source of Taylor's stress. Her lack of awareness was almost impressive. She genuinely seemed to believe that Taylor was happy to contribute to her dream wedding. The Sunday before Thanksgiving, Taylor's grandparents on David's side came for a visit. Taylor's grandmother, Eleanor, pulled Taylor aside to ask about college plans. Taylor hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but ultimately decided to keep the secret for a few more days. Eleanor seemed to sense something was wrong, but Taylor deflected her questions, saying only that there had been some financial changes that Taylor was still figuring out. She gave Taylor $200 for textbooks, pressing it into Taylor's hand with a worried expression. That evening, Taylor reviewed the recording one more time, listening to David's voice explaining why they had taken the money. The casual way he discussed sacrificing Taylor's future for Brianna's wedding was chilling. Taylor made a few notes about the most impactful parts of the confession, the moments when David admitted they never planned to tell Taylor, when he dismissed Taylor's academic achievements as not needing the money as much, when he justified the decision by saying Brianna was their real investment in the future. As Thanksgiving approached, Taylor felt both nervous and resolved. The plan was set, the evidence was secure, and the moment of truth was just days away. Taylor thought about what would happen after, whether there was any chance of repairing the relationship with David and Michelle, whether Brianna would ever understand the gravity of what she had participated in, whether the extended family would side with Taylor or with the parents. The uncertainty was daunting, but the alternative, silence and acceptance of the betrayal, was unthinkable. Thanksgiving morning dawned crisp and clear. Taylor woke early, the recording already uploaded to multiple cloud services and the phone fully charged. The house was already bustling with activity, Michelle directing the kitchen preparations, David setting up extra tables and chairs, and Brianna flitting between rooms in her new Thanksgiving outfit, already taking photos for social media. Taylor's role had been assigned days ago: help with setting the table, keep the drinks replenished, and generally stay out of the way. This was perfect for Taylor's plan, as it allowed for movement throughout the house and access to all areas without raising suspicion. Taylor moved through the morning tasks mechanically, conserving emotional energy for what was to come. By noon, guests began arriving. First came Michelle's parents, Richard and Eleanor, wealthy retirees who doted on Brianna and barely acknowledged Taylor's presence. They brought an expensive bottle of champagne and immediately began discussing the upcoming wedding with Brianna, admiring the photos she had on her phone. Next came David's mother, Alice, who lived in a nearby retirement community. She arrived with a homemade pumpkin pie and immediately sought out Taylor for a warm hug and a quiet conversation about school. As more relatives filled the house, the noise level increased exponentially. The air became thick with cooking smells and perfumes, the sounds of overlapping conversations and clattering dishes. Taylor observed the family dynamics with a new perspective: how Michelle's family treated Brianna like royalty while barely speaking to Taylor, how David's family tried to include Taylor but were often redirected by Michelle, how Brianna commanded attention in every room she entered. The dinner itself was a masterclass in family performance. David carved the turkey with practiced precision, Michelle directed the serving of dishes with military efficiency, and Brianna held court at the head of the table, entertaining everyone with stories of wedding planning and honeymoon preparations. Taylor sat quietly, answering direct questions but otherwise remaining silent, which was interpreted as typical teenage sullenness rather than the calm before a storm. Throughout the meal, Taylor couldn't help but notice the stark contrasts in how the family members were treated. When Brianna mentioned a small issue with the wedding venue, Michelle's parents immediately offered to pay extra to have it resolved. When Taylor mentioned an academic achievement, the response was a brief "that's nice" before the conversation returned to Brianna. The favoritism had always been present, but seeing it all at once in front of the entire family made it undeniable. As dinner wound down and plates were cleared, Michelle's father stood to make his traditional Thanksgiving toast. He spoke of family, gratitude, and the joy of seeing his granddaughter Brianna preparing to start her new life with Tyler. He mentioned everyone by name, except Taylor, an oversight that several people noticed but chose to ignore. Taylor caught Alice's eye across the table. She gave a small, sympathetic smile that Taylor acknowledged with a slight nod. This was the moment Taylor had been waiting for. The timing was perfect. Everyone was seated, relaxed, and attentive. The dishes hadn't been cleared yet, and no one was in a hurry to leave. Taylor stood up slowly, the phone in hand, thumb positioned over the play button. A hush fell over the room as all eyes turned to Taylor. Michelle looked annoyed, as if Taylor was about to make an inappropriate joke or attention-seeking comment. David seemed wary, perhaps sensing that something was about to happen. Brianna appeared bored, already checking her phone under the table. Taylor didn't speak immediately, letting the silence build. When Taylor finally began to speak, the voice was steady and clear, cutting through the post-dinner lethargy. Taylor started by thanking everyone for coming, for the food, for the gathering, standard Thanksgiving acknowledgments that put everyone at ease. Then Taylor shifted, mentioning gratitude for family support, for parents who provide for their children's futures. The transition was subtle but effective. As Taylor spoke of parental support and sacrifice, David and Michelle began to exchange nervous glances. Taylor's voice remained calm as they mentioned the importance of education, of having the resources to pursue one's dreams. The room was completely silent now, everyone sensing that this was not going to be a typical holiday speech. And then Taylor said it, the words that would change everything. "I'm especially grateful for the financial support my parents have always promised me, like the college fund they've been building since I was born. A fund that, as it turns out, they decided to use for something else entirely." The words hung in the air, a moment of suspended reality before the chaos erupted. Taylor pressed play on the phone, and David's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. The recording began with Taylor's calm question about the missing college fund, followed by David's hesitant admissions and eventual full confession. As the recording played, the reactions around the table varied dramatically. Michelle's face went from confusion to horror to fury. David looked as if he might be sick, his face pale and his hands trembling. Brianna appeared confused at first, then defensive as she realized what was happening. The extended family members sat in stunned silence, their expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to dawning understanding. The most impactful moments of the recording were when David admitted they never planned to tell Taylor about taking the money. When he dismissed Taylor's academic achievements by saying, "Taylor's smart, we'll get scholarships anyway." And when he justified the decision by saying Brianna's wedding was more important for the family's future. Each admission was followed by an audible gasp or murmur from the relatives. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Taylor stood calmly, phone still in hand, waiting for someone to speak. The first to break the silence was Alice, David's mother, who asked in a trembling voice if the recording was real. Taylor nodded, then pulled out printed copies of the bank statements showing the withdrawals and the wedding invoices, passing them around the table. Michelle's parents, Richard and Eleanor, examined the documents with growing outrage. Eleanor was the first to speak, her voice cold as she turned to Michelle and David. "You took $80,000 from your child's education fund to pay for a wedding without even telling them?" The accusation hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving. David tried to defend himself, stammering about family obligations and the importance of Brianna's wedding, but his excuses fell flat in the face of the evidence. Michelle, meanwhile, turned on Taylor, accusing them of being selfish and manipulative, of trying to ruin Brianna's special day. Her defense of their actions only made the situation worse, highlighting the complete lack of remorse or understanding. Brianna, surprisingly, said nothing at first. She looked at the documents, at Taylor, at her parents, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her words were not what anyone expected. "Did you know about this?" she asked Taylor, not with anger, but with genuine confusion. "Did you know they were using your money for the wedding?" Taylor nodded, explaining that they had only found out recently, that they had tried to discuss it with their parents but had been dismissed. This admission seemed to shift something in Brianna's understanding. She looked at her parents with a new expression, not anger, but disappointment. The situation escalated quickly. Alice announced that she would be contacting her lawyer to ensure that Taylor's educational needs were met, even if it meant suing her own son. Richard and Eleanor declared that they would no longer be contributing to the wedding expenses and would be reconsidering their financial support of Michelle and David altogether. Other relatives murmured among themselves, the family alliances shifting in real time. Michelle and David found themselves isolated, their actions exposed and condemned by nearly everyone present. Michelle tried to rally support, reminding everyone how much Brianna deserved this perfect wedding, but her arguments were met with shaking heads and disapproving looks. The dream wedding was rapidly becoming a nightmare. The breaking point came when Tyler, Brianna's fiancé, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. He asked quietly if any of the money from Taylor's fund had been used for the honeymoon. When Taylor confirmed that it had, he stood up and announced that he and Brianna would be paying for their own honeymoon and that they would be scaling back the wedding significantly. He then turned to Brianna and asked if she would be willing to postpone the wedding until they could afford it themselves. Brianna's response surprised everyone. She nodded, then stood and walked over to Taylor. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, not trying to excuse her behavior, but simply acknowledging the wrong that had been done. "I didn't know they took your money without telling you. That's not okay." The admission, coming from Brianna, was the final blow to Michelle and David. Their golden child had turned against them, their carefully constructed family narrative crumbling in front of everyone. The Thanksgiving dinner had become a reckoning, a moment of truth that would forever alter the family dynamics. In the days following Thanksgiving, the fallout from the exposure rippled through the family in unexpected ways. Taylor moved out of the family home the next day, taking only what could fit in a suitcase and moving into the dorm at State University earlier than planned. Alice, Taylor's grandmother, arranged for the unused portion of the dorm payment to be covered immediately, ensuring Taylor had a safe place to stay. The relationship between Taylor and Brianna evolved in ways Taylor hadn't anticipated. A few days after the Thanksgiving revelation, Brianna reached out, suggesting they meet for coffee. The conversation was awkward at first, but Brianna surprised Taylor by offering to help pay back the college fund. She explained that she and Tyler had decided to scale back the wedding significantly, using the savings to begin repaying what had been taken from Taylor. What Taylor learned during that coffee meeting was eye-opening. Brianna admitted that she had always been aware of the preferential treatment she received, but hadn't realized the extent of it until the Thanksgiving dinner. She confessed that her mother had often made comments about Taylor being too independent and not needing as much support, which Brianna had accepted without question. The revelation made Taylor see Brianna not as an adversary, but as another product of Michelle and David's skewed parenting. David and Michelle's lives were upended in the weeks that followed. Richard and Eleanor, Michelle's parents, followed through on their threat to withdraw financial support, creating immediate strain on their household budget. Alice consulted her attorney and discovered that while what David and Michelle had done was morally reprehensible, it wasn't technically illegal since they were the custodians of the account until Taylor turned 21. However, the threat of legal action, combined with family pressure, prompted them to agree to a repayment plan. The wedding, which had been scheduled for late December, was postponed indefinitely. Brianna and Tyler decided to wait until they could afford the wedding themselves, planning a smaller ceremony for the following summer. This decision caused a major rift between Brianna and Michelle, who couldn't understand why Brianna would give up her dream wedding. The irony of Michelle accusing Brianna of sacrifice was not lost on Taylor. As the holiday season approached, Taylor found themselves navigating a new family dynamic. Alice became Taylor's strongest advocate, ensuring that Taylor's educational expenses were covered and creating a new college fund with help from other relatives who had been horrified by David and Michelle's actions. Taylor spent Christmas with Alice and other relatives from David's side of the family, experiencing a holiday season free from the tension and favoritism that had colored previous celebrations. The most unexpected development came in early January when Taylor received a call from Richard, Michelle's father. He apologized for his family's role in creating the dynamic that had led to the betrayal, acknowledging that his and Eleanor's favoritism toward Brianna had contributed to Michelle's behavior. He offered to contribute to Taylor's education not as a replacement for what had been taken, but as an acknowledgement of the injustice. Taylor accepted, establishing a tentative connection with the side of the family that had previously seemed so distant. By the time the spring semester began, Taylor had settled into a new normal. The college fund was being gradually replenished through contributions from multiple family members and a payment plan from David and Michelle. The relationship with David was strained but functional. They spoke occasionally, mostly about practical matters, with a careful avoidance of emotional topics. Michelle, however, remained cold and distant, apparently blaming Taylor for the family upheaval rather than accepting responsibility for her actions. Taylor's friendship with Brianna continued to develop, marked by honest conversations about their shared childhood and the different ways they had been affected by their parents' favoritism. Brianna admitted that she had often felt pressured to live up to the golden child image, a burden that had shaped her decisions and relationships. Their growing understanding of each other's experiences created a bond that hadn't existed before, a silver lining in the midst of family turmoil. As Taylor reflected on the events that had transformed their family, the anger and betrayal gradually gave way to a more nuanced understanding. The exposure at Thanksgiving was necessary, not just for financial reasons, but to break a cycle of favoritism and dysfunction that had been years in the making. The family would never be the same, but perhaps that was for the best. From the ashes of the old dynamics, new relationships were forming, more honest, more equitable, and ultimately more genuine. The college fund would eventually be restored, but what Taylor had gained was more valuable than money. The clarity to recognize unhealthy family patterns, the courage to challenge them, and the wisdom to build new connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation. The Thanksgiving dinner that had exposed the truth had also opened the door to a different future. One that Taylor would navigate with the strength that comes from facing difficult truths and choosing to move forward anyway.